Yay, we're live. Welcome back. MoneyWi's Wednesday.
Welcome back.
Welcome back.
I know.
2025.
It's
2025.
already the middle of January.
Yep.
How? And I love Wednesdays because not only is it MoneyWi's Wednesday, but it's also Wear It Wednesday.
That's right.
And
she wore it.
so Wear It Wednesday is when we at Envision kind of make it a fun, casual day for staff where we have a theme for the day. And today's theme is dress up or wear or represent your favorite with podcast or movie, book. I don't know if book was one of them. Author, influencer. Yeah. So like I didn't have like one. I was curious about how I can't wait to go
my
later.
favorite podcaster. Me.
I know exactly. Yep, exactly.
Very clever.
Uh-huh.
And so this shirt was given to me by a dear friend, but it says, for those of you who can't see it, I'll stand up.
Yeah.
It says, I like murder shows, comfy clothes, and maybe 3 people. and there's 2 in the room. So
yeah, we're not them. Yeah.
I wonder who that other guy is. But anyway, so I do have to give a disclaimer though on the murder show thing because I am a crime junkie. However, I do think there's a difference between true crime documentary kind of vibe and like the romanticism of murder. And I just want to be very clear that I don't like all those cheesy shows or podcasts that really romanticize murder. I think that's icky and gross. I'm really interested in the kind of the psychology behind it. I'm really interested in like homicide detective work, like how they solve crimes, and then like genealogy and DNA. So like I really can appreciate, well, and of course it's justice for victims and their families. But I really can appreciate, journalists who bring forth ideas in a way that kind of shines a spotlight on certain things. And so that's the kind of stuff I like. So the murder shows sounds a little icky, but I just want y'all to know I had to clear that because I just hate it. I hate that when people are like, oh, you should listen to, if you like crime stuff, you should listen to this podcast. And I'll go, oh my gosh, I hate that podcast.
So I joke with my wife all the time because every time I walk into the room at night, there's like the most brutal murder happening on the screen. And I'm like,
that's me.
What are you watching?
And she's probably eating a bag of chips or something, like totally unaffected. Yeah.
Yep. So
so that's mine. So do you guys have a favorite other than yourselves as podcasters? Do y'all have like a favorite TV show or podcaster?
So I like random facts. So one of my favorite podcasts is Stuff You Should Know.
Okay.
And so they just literally talk about random things and
that's cool.
Just things you wouldn't know or things to learn more about. So
yeah, that is neat. You're like, oh wow, I never knew that. It's probably answering the questions that toddlers of the world ask.
Exactly.
Because you're like, what made you think of asking how that thing is made? Or it's like, I don't really know. My daughter asks me stuff all the time. I'm like, that's a great question, but I have no idea.
No idea. Yep.
How about you?
I don't listen to podcasts, and I'm the one that probably drives
TV?
the most. Yeah.
TV show or what,
movie. Like
movies?
I love Shawshank Redemption. I almost wore a shirt with the saying from it, but then I was going to have to stand up, so I didn't want to do that.
But you should have.
But that's okay. But I also would have had to make it.
I told these guys earlier, there was one of our Wear It Wednesdays that I really wanted to participate, but I didn't have time to like go get the shirt or anything. So I literally printed out on a piece of paper whatever the theme was and taped it to my shirt, and it was the tackiest thing, but we got the memo across.
I really wanted to wear jeans that day.
I wasn't going to be that bad. I drug out my Cricut, but then I was like,
oh no.
I'll just go with myself.
You're good at stuff like that.
Yeah, but not at the last minute when I didn't look at the memo.
That's true. That's true.
But I love movies, and I do love true crime. I don't like scary stuff, but I'll watch a murder all day long.
Yeah.
Ooh, I love scary stuff.
And Shawshank and
I used to in college, but I can't do scary
Forrest
stuff anymore.
Gump. Okay. Like I can watch those over and over again.
You like long movies.
Well, not
just
necessarily. It just happened to be, but
I feel like all movies are long now.
Yes.
I guess that's true.
I guess when you're going to spend that much time and money in producing something, that's probably why they're so long now. It's because we're taking longer to paint pictures of stories, and I think like of telling stories. There's more detail involved.
And I can watch Bluey episodes all day long.
Listen, I feel that way. I feel that way about Blue. Did you say Bluey?
Bluey.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah. Sorry, I was thinking Blues Clues.
No, that was like.
But yes, Bluey is awesome.
Yeah, Bluey is the man. The girl.
Yeah, I was going to say Bluey is the girl.
Bluey's the girl.
But her dad's the man.
Yes.
He's hilarious. Okay, so there's your
Anyway,
plugs
there you
for
go.
all
Yeah.
things
All things.
movie
Yes, I could go
show.
into Bluey all
They're
day.
like, we're not watching any of that.
Yeah. I definitely can learn a lot of great life lessons, especially about how to be a better parent. They make me feel like an awful parent when I
Yeah,
watch that.
yeah.
I'm like, okay, I can do
Yeah.
better. Thank you very much.
But they're cartoons. So
Exactly.
yeah, but they're written by real
Yeah.
people, so
who don't do that either.
no, yeah, but maybe their hearts deserves to be
Maybe,
better.
yeah.
They're also super rich,
Yes.
which we can go into later. But
Yeah, that's true. They definitely are. Okay, so let's talk about why we're really here today.
if you
and
want to be rich,
That's right. That's right. And
Let's do
we
this.
normally at the beginning of the year we talk about budgeting, right? Because this is obviously the theme for the beginning of every new year is
year.
kind of like reflecting back on last year. What did we do well? What could we have done better? And then thinking about what new things we want to put into place to help us either not make those mistakes again or to keep doing what was working or what did work well. But this year we're going to change it up just a little bit. And while, yes, we do talk a little bit about budgeting and having kind of a plan for your money, we really wanted to talk about this question that we often get a lot in our financial counseling. And that's the balancing act of, do I save or do I spend? How do I balance doing both? Because if you're coming into the new year with more debt than you had last year, and maybe that's because of the holiday season, maybe you spent more money, or maybe you put more money on or purchase more from credit, we have a problem with that, right? So it's like, well, then how do I get ahead and save? So we're gonna do that. Now, last week, in order to kind of prep for this, I put a question out on some of my social platforms to try to see what financial advice people would give their younger self. So I want you guys to kind of be thinking about that. I don't want you to answer it right now. I'm going to be nice to you. I'm not going to just hit you and go, here, answer that.
Oh, the daggers.
But yeah. But I want you guys to just think about it. And then at the end, maybe we can kind of talk about, what would I go back and give myself? Because it was funny because someone flipped the question back on me and said, I'd be curious to hear what your financial advice would be to yourself. And so I was like, yeah. So I had to pause and stop and think about it for a little bit, because I really was putting it out there for just kind of, gauging my social networks. So one of the things that I think was a theme in some of the people's responses is save more. I heard that a lot. I wish I would have saved more. I wish I would have saved more. I wish I would have saved more. Like, I heard that a lot. And then I heard some people talk a little bit more about investing, which again, I know is in saving, but more in the lines of like, I didn't understand it. It's like, put it up there in the category. I put it up there in the category of like AI and Bitcoin and all of those things where we're not as familiar with the topic. And so we kind of tend to avoid that. And I think people look at least I did growing up, I looked at investing as taking risk. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't a big risk taker. I'm more of a risk taker now than I was then. But again, I think that's because I understand it a little bit more. Right. So I think that those were kind of the biggest responses that I really heard from people. But then there was this kind of underlying theme that I've really kind of experienced last year in working with people. And I think it's through public speaking events or going to, being invited in as a guest speaker for groups of people or young people. And I just recognized last year how much the adult world shames people for the choices that they make. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So I wanted to shed a spotlight on that, because I think that's a problem. Yeah. I think we need to quit making people in general feel bad about the decisions they make. And we've talked about this before. Like, it's okay to like go buy the Starbucks coffee, but it shouldn't be what I'm teaching my workshop on to go, how dare you? It's more like, if you want the Starbucks, you can have the Starbucks. Just be smart about how you work that into your payment, schedule or whatever. Right. So, and I know I've talked about that a little bit, but that, I don't know, it just kind of really, I don't know. I feel like it's just something that's carrying over into my 2025 kind of thoughts on money management. Cause I just really feel like that's not cool. And again, our groups of, other people who do what we do, like financial counselors, certified financial counselors, or financial advisors. I'm starting to meet more of them in my career as I go further in my career. And I hear some of the things these people are saying. And I'm like, I agree with a lot of things that they're teaching, but at the same time, it's like, if we're standing in front of a group of young people, we don't need to be calling out, people for having the Stanley Cup, and there's 4 Stanley Cups on the table in front of you. It's like, that's just icky and not cool. Yeah. So, all right. So let's talk a little bit about then the financial dilemma debt versus savings. So for many, we know that personal finances, sometimes you feel like, especially at the beginning of the year, you might feel like you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one side, you have this debt that is accumulating interest. And on the other side, you have a need for having a safety net, right? And a safety net to protect you from all of the unexpected curveballs that are going to come your way. So I like to kind of think of it as, I was trying to think of an analogy. And one of the things I thought of was kind of like when you're trying to make it safe to shore in a boat that has a leak, right? Or, that has a hole in it. And so like, what do you focus on first? Do you focus on getting the water out of the boat so you don't sink, right? Or are you focusing more on rowing faster so that you can get where you need to go, right? So it certainly can cause some panic. So there's two parts that I really want to talk about. I want to talk about the why you feel overwhelmed in that instance. If you are doing the balancing act, you're probably overwhelmed. And this is why I think a lot of people are like, where do I start? Right. Usually the first thing we say is take a deep breath. Like, let's get it all on paper and it's okay. It certainly can feel very overwhelming, but I think there's two major reasons why it feels overwhelming. And I know that there are more, but today I just want to focus on two. One of them is the cost of interest. One of the things that I think we've discovered from 2024 is that the high interest impact is here. Like when the Fed rose rates, we all started feeling that like in those statements, right, that come in the mail, right? Our members who are going through counseling are like, okay, we've been working on this for a while. Why does it feel like I'm etching away, but the rock is not getting smaller? Like, what is happening here, right? And I think it's because that cost of interest is finally rearing its ugly head, and it can grow very quickly. For some people that I worked with last year, I think the realization of their high interest debt situation, like their eyes were like unveiled to it. Like it had always been there, but I think the reality of it was like, whoa.
Yeah, we were spoiled for a little while with the lower interest rates right before the pandemic. And so buying a car wasn't, of course there's interest involved, but it's not that bad. I remember my mom was able to get a car with 0% because the interest rates were just really good. But now today, if you want to buy that same vehicle, it costs you more. And even if you bought it a year ago, your payments are higher than what it would have been 5 years ago. So it's just coming to that realization that people are butting against now, especially with grocery prices and everything else being so inflated.
Yeah, all those things kind of come to like a culmination. It all comes together. And I think for most consumers, for most of us in that situation, you can find yourself feeling like you're just running in place, like on a treadmill. It's like, I'm running really fast here, but I'm not getting anywhere. So I want you to imagine that you owe $5,000 on a credit card with a 20% interest rate, which is very realistic right now. Actually, that's a low interest rate.
Low.
28, 29 is probably more realistic. And by making only minimum payments, you could end up paying over $10,000 by the time that you clear that balance. That's twice the initial balance amount. And that's money that could go towards savings or investings. And so I think, again, this is where people go, all right, well then how do I chip away at that? So I have less compounding interest, right? On those trade lines.
Can I tell a story about that real quick?
Go ahead.
So I don't know if I've told this before, but back in high school, when I graduated high school, I was 18 years old and it was Christmas time. And
Is this the mom purse thing?
Yeah.
Yes, I love this story.
I really wanted to buy my mom a purse because I'm a great son and I'm amazing. But I wanted to buy my mom a purse, and I know she likes purses. So I went into Dillard's, and it was the purse section. I don't know anything about purses. I just saw it looked cool, so I got it. It was a $500 purse.
And that was a lot back then.
Wow.
I mean, you're not.
That's a lot now.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
I have never spent that much money on a purse. You must really love your mama. I hope she hears this.
Mama. Yeah, I don't know if she still has that purse, but anyways, I
hope she watches the podcast and hears so much.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I get to the register with this purse. I'm like, hey. So what makes this story worse is I had the cash in my pocket because I had a little job in the mall.
That's right.
And so I was working at the shoe store in the mall, so I had cash. But I get to the register. Remember, I'm fresh out of high school, 18. And the cashier's like, hey, are you 18? I sure am. well, if you apply for a Dillard's card, you get 20% off this purchase today. And I'm like, well, how long does it take? It takes like 5 minutes. I was like, okay, go ahead. I didn't read a single line of disclosures or anything. I got my little 20%, bought the purse, got my little Dillard's card, and it took me about 5 years making minimum payments to pay off that $500 purse.
Probably
So-
longer than she had the purse.
Probably.
So what made you not go back to your bank, put that $500 back in, and immediately pay it off the first month that statement came in? What was it that? What do you think it was?
It was the fact that I could just pay $40 a month
Okay.
and just not have to change anything else. Oh, $40.
You
is
just
not a
didn't do
big
the
deal.
math to figure out how
didn't
many
do it.
months it would be.
Because then you
I didn't
had
know the
that
interest rate
pocket.
was about 30%.
You had that money in your pocket. You were good to
Exactly.
go.
Do you
Exactly.
remember how much ultimately you paid for that $500 purse?
Oh,
Did
it
you
was
ever do the
close to
math?
$1,200. Yeah, something like that.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
But that's a great example of this is reality.
Yeah.
And you
yeah.
put that, you do the purse this quarter, next quarter, it's that trip
Mhm.
that you took. And the
Mhm.
next, so a family has consumed thousands of dollars
Mhm.
in balances,
Exactly.
not to mention the interest they're going to accumulate
Mhm.
years later.
Yeah, I didn't understand compound interest. I didn't understand interest rates. And I had been taught that stuff because my parents actually taught me this stuff. I was a kid and I didn't,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah. You were
just
younger.
didn't regret it.
Yeah. So the cost of interest is certainly one of them. The second part that I think that makes it feel overwhelming is the psychological toll. Now,
Yes.
this one is interesting. I even when I was kind of preparing for this, I was even kind of contradicting some of my thinking again, because there's what Kelly believes or what Kelly thinks
Mhm.
or Kelly would do. And then there's also the real examples of like what members actually are experiencing and how their stories kind of affect what I'm thinking, right? But then there's like for us as counselors, it's what we know will work, or what we know. I hate to say right or wrong because I've always said there's no black or white. There's no like one way for everybody. And so this one is a little interesting. So the psychological toll, obviously carrying the stress of high interest debt or just debt in general, doesn't, even if you have good debt, like
Sure.
I shouldn't say good debt. Even all debt is bad, but even if you have low interest debt, it can still cause stress because you owe somebody something.
Sure.
And then there's the stress of what happens if I lose my job or if I get sick or if this situation gets worse or if I, God forbid, go through a divorce or separation, which we've talked about in a past session, right? All of that stress can lead to anxiety, guilt, maybe a sense of urgency to do something, which again is a good thing. I think a sense of urgency can be a good thing. So I'm going to play devil's advocate here. So y'all just hang with me.
Okay.
So sometimes y'all told me you love that about me, and the other times I'm sure it probably drives you mad. And then there's the societal pressure, right? The stigmatism that can come with debt. So I'm going to challenge y'all here and say studies show that psychologically the societal pressure, like I said earlier about the people who go, well, you should save more than spend. You shouldn't buy the Stanley. You shouldn't go to Starbucks. The shaming factor, to me, that's what causes the societal pressures, right? Where you're stigmatizing debt. However, I think the root motivation for that is good because we know that if you do this, then you will feel this way or experience this freedom or, have this relief or whatever. So I think we got to find what is that good balance. And I think just like any other topic that we talk about, I think what's important for people to kind of take away from this is like, you got to know you. You got to know what motivates you. Right. You got to know what keeps you up at night in regarding your money. What gives you heartburn? What do you feel shame about? And don't worry about what other people say. So I have to like disclaim that and say, don't be afraid to like go, okay, Kelly, I hear you, but that doesn't work for me. Like I don't take that personally, but I know some counselors are like, nope, there's only one way and it's this way.
The interesting thing about this is that a lot of people get into this situation because of societal pressures. They want to have what their neighbors have, and they want to go on the trips that they go on, and they feel like they see it all around them. And so those pressures are what got them into the debt to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah,
for a lot of people,
social media stigma.
Right?
So you see the best parts of everybody online.
You want to go to that that skiing trip, or you want to buy those things for your kids, even though you know that you can't afford them. So you put that aside because you want to keep up with everybody else.
Yeah,
And
keep up with
then
the Joneses.
when you get there, then you feel shame because you got there,
Mhm.
because you're trying to do what everybody else is doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to tell my son. So my son has a best friend whose family is very, very well off, and they do a lot of cool things. They go skiing, they have lots of toys and cool things, and he often asks us, "Hey, can we get this thing or go on this trip?" And it's like, "Hey, buddy, we're not in the same economics." We don't say it like that, but we basically say we're not in the same economic status as them. We can't do the same things that they do, but here's what we can do. So having those conversations are
Yeah, that's
tough
good.
because
They're very tough.
you
Yeah.
see what everybody else is doing and you want to provide those things for your family and whatever, but just have to face reality sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, so getting back to the stigma part, like people shaming people, like at the same time, I don't love that aspect of it, but
Mhm.
is it really a bad thing? Because sometimes it takes something like that to shape us up,
Sure.
True.
right? Or to go like, you know what I mean? So that's where I kind of got a little contradicting of myself in this. It's like, I agree that the stigma of debt is bad can often cause shame or feelings of inadequacy as a person, right? But is that so bad? Because we want you to feel so bad about
Mhm.
your frivolous spending that you stop doing it.
Sure.
And
Like to a point that you're willing to change something,
Right.
right?
We were in that situation, and it was draining. It was just absolutely horrible. And we did it to ourselves. We dug ourselves in that hole because we wanted this and we wanted that. When we finally got out of it, we ended up selling a house to get out of that situation because we needed to. We needed a
Sure.
fresh start. And I wouldn't recommend that for everybody, but it's what worked for us. We got out of the house. And just when we paid everything off, it was just such a sense of
It
relief.
feels so good.
Yeah, it was so good. It was that house, and most of the money that we spent was on the house.
Sure.
But getting out from under that and having everything paid off was like the greatest thing ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, where you
was
don't want to
amazing.
be is financially apathetic. So I was doing some research on mental states of people in debt and things like that. And financial apathy really is a thing where you get into this state where I'm just always going to be in debt.
Right.
So why
Yeah.
even try? Right.
Mhm.
And I've talked to a lot of people that have felt like that. Like there's this mountain is so big, how there's no point in even
Yeah.
Right.
attempting. Right.
Yeah.
And that's where you don't want to be because there is hope. Like I've been there. I've seen the mountain pile above my head, but we slowly dug out of it. It took years and effort and time, but it can be done. But like you were saying, you have to have that enough is enough mindset.
Yeah.
And you have to be like, okay, what do I need to do to push forward and move this mountain? Or
Yeah, I
dig
think
from
the
under it.
danger is when people start to begin to see the reality of their situation, but they choose to continue to still live the lie of
Right.
trying to keep up with the Joneses.
Yeah.
That's the dangerous part, I think, is like projecting a different lifestyle than, because you could. I mean, I've heard of stories where, or know people, or we've seen movies of stories where people who, like your son's friend, for example, what if you guys were like, oh, well, because Ethan said that, then we want to give our son, we want our son to feel, and you could have gone the opposite direction with that and go,
Okay.
And to
you
be
know?
totally honest, we caught ourselves doing that a few times.
Well, sure.
You know, like, whoa, this isn't actually us. Like we're not.
But
Yeah.
you don't know if the Joneses are keeping up with themselves
That's
either.
the thing,
that's
too.
true.
So
That's true.
Yeah.
It's all what you think.
Yeah.
Just, we talked about a story of someone the other day. So it's like where other people have this idea about someone else. It's like, you don't know their situation.
Nope.
You don't know them.
I have to highlight this awesome comment that F Doctor left on YouTube. They said, I think this message should be with grace, seasoned with salt.
There you go. I love it.
I love
That's
that.
the best
Mhm.
way
That's awesome.
to summarize that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I love, wow. That's really
Very
wise.
nice.
Yeah.
Right.
I love it. Okay. So part 2 of this then is why saving feels essential to us, right? So it's like that safety net. Why is it? Obviously, we won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but the importance of the safety net, obviously, these are the
yeah.
emergencies,
Yeah,
right? Emergencies like car repairs, medical bills, or job loss. Those things don't wait for debt to be paid off.
Mhm.
It doesn't, and 9 times out of 10, if you've done a little bit of life like us, usually the emergency happens when your debt is at that mountain peak. You're like, oh my gosh.
Yep.
And, is it as bad as it was, or is it magnified because your situation is so
Right.
severe. Who knows? We've shared the statistic before, but I did look up to see if this number changed. But according to a 2024 bank rate survey from last year, 56% of Americans cannot cover an unexpected $1,000 expense without going into more debt. Other studies might show that number's higher. I've seen up into like 70%. Again, it just depends on where they're getting their polling information from. But somewhere between 56 and 70% in the room cannot cover $1,000 expense. So if you're listening to this, I want you to stop and ask yourself, is that me? I'm not going to ask you guys that, of course, but like, I want everybody to take a minute and think about that. Like, if $1,000 emergency happened right now, would I be able to pay for it? Right. Without savings, emergency can force people to rely on the high interest credit or loans, perpetuating the cycle that we've been talking about.
Exactly. And the fastest thing to derail a debt repayment plan is an emergency.
Right.
Absolutely.
Especially if you don't have that emergency fund.
Yep. So the other part of why saving feels essential to us is that emotional comfort. Yes. So we talk about the psychological impact of all of that, right? So having a small amount of savings can provide a little bit of peace of mind, might be able to reduce your financial stress. And I like to say, like, an emergency fund is kind of like a cushion. It doesn't necessarily eliminate the fall. It just cushions the blow just a little bit, so it doesn't hurt as bad, right? All right. So moving into then the main part of our discussion, then what the catch-22 of balancing both. Can you have your cake and eat it too? Basically, two major areas here. One is limited resources. Most people don't have unlimited resources, right? So the reality of what do we have to work with matters.
Right.
We are all typically on a fixed income, right? And a lot of times don't have extra money to put towards debt. So you've got to change something within your current, life situation. Maybe it's what groceries you buy, where you buy them, how frequently you buy them, the types of, like, you can bring this all the way down to the types of meals we're cooking for dinner, the types of vacations that we take, if we fly or if we drive, do we rent a car? Do we drive our own car? Do we borrow a car? I mean, things that you normally maybe didn't consider before. This is where realizing your resources around you and that they are limited, but then getting creative with solutions, I think can really, really help you. But I think too, like, knowing that we have limited resources as well, sometimes it helps us drive the decisions month to month on where we allocate our money, where we're going to choose to allocate our money. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, you don't know if you have limited resources or not until you actually sit down and do that budget.
Right.
I know everybody hates hearing it from us, but you really, at some point, you have to say, how much do I make? How much do I spend? And you will never know if you have a cushion or not until you do that. You could have more cushion than you thought you did, or you could have more monthly money. And so you have to figure that part out.
Yeah, no, that's good. The other catch-22, I think, is that even amongst the three of us, if we really had more time to dive into some of the concepts that we dive into every month in our webinars, you will find that financial experts often have opposing views. And so if you're reading a book or watching or listening to a podcast or watching a show, or even talking to a friend or a family member, there's often very opposing views on ideals about money. And so sometimes that can get confusing, and people might go, I don't really know what to do. I don't know which way to go. Some experts will say that paying off debt should always come first because of the high interest rates. And others might argue that you can't afford not to save. Like you just said, if you don't have an emergency fund and you're trying to work on a debt repayment and then an emergency happens, you're now knocked off your rocker.
Exactly.
I had this happen. I had somebody that I was working with, and I've known her for quite a while, and somebody told her to pay off all her debt, and she did, and she had no money, $0 in savings.
But she was debt-free.
But she was debt-free, and then an emergency happened, and guess what?
Right back into debt.
Right back into debt. And probably at a higher rate than she would have been had she
had the cushion.
Yeah, had the cushion, because when people get desperate, they do desperate things.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so she may, and I don't know this for sure, but they may apply for something at a really high interest rate just because they need it, like a payday loan or something like that, without slowing down, because they don't have the opportunity to slow down,
Yeah.
right? They have to make that decision now.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we've been 100% debt free before, and it was beautiful. And then we had a kid.
Yeah.
And it just changed everything.
Yeah.
And so,
I was debt free
that
when I was
happens.
17.
Listen to you. Well, and I want to be careful too, like, that we, again, I can sit here and say, at the same time, I can say not all debt is bad debt. At the same time, saying debt is bad.
Right.
Being in debt to someone is bad.
Sure.
Any way you look at it. I'm not saying that it's not necessary, but again, it's what works for you. If you feel like debt is bad and being in debt is bad because it gives you the anxieties and like feeling like you owe somebody else, then debt is bad. But we have some people, like you said, like I have a friend who always has a car payment. She's like, I will always have a car payment because I always want a newer car that's under warranty because that gives me peace of mind at
There you
night.
go.
But she has a job that pays her enough money to be able to pay for a car payment every single month. And she's done that as long as I've known her.
Right.
And her whole adult life, she's always had a somewhat newer car. It's just her thing. And that's okay. Like, that's fine.
Yeah.
The choice is hers.
I tell people all the time in sessions, you can go through your whole life paying cash. It's just going to take you longer to do things. So debt is what gets you those things faster, but there's a price.
Right.
So
Exactly. Are you willing to pay the price?
Yep.
Yeah. And that's what I even wrote here. Like the choice is yours. No one makes it for you. It's just your choice. Like you get to decide. Just take all the information, that works. I think again, the salt here of this, right? We're delivering the flavor, but with a little bit of the saltiness is are you being honest with yourself? And are you not, living that double standard, right? Of this, saying one thing or being one thing and then having to look in the mirror at someone else, it's like, anyways. So, okay, let's move into the fourth part here. And that is, what are the risks when you ignore either side of our balancing act? If you only focus on debt, you leave yourself vulnerable to unexpected expenses, like we've talked about, potentially could lead you to more debt, like the example Kelly just gave. And then, if you only focus on your savings, then your debt might continue to grow, particularly high interest debt if we lived through 2024. Right. And that can make it harder to manage that debt over time. Or obviously it's going to cost you more money in the long run, right? Because you've let it sit there longer. And so you're paying interest on the interest, right? And over time, you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. You don't chip away at the mountaintop.
That's what compound interest is, by the way. I don't want to assume everybody knows what that means. Compound interest is when you owe interest on the interest that you've already accumulated.
Right.
The term.
And it can be a positive in investing.
Right.
Compounding interest can be great when you're saving money because you can earn more money on the money that you're earning. Right. So
Can you say that twice?
Right. No. Say that 3 times fast now. So, an example of if you're only focusing on saving, let's say, what if you have $1,000, but your credit card debt is going to grow by another $1,000 in interest because you're only paying the minimum on it.
Yep.
Because you're only focusing on now. But again, can you do both at the same time though? Like, I work with members who, and this is where I kind of want to move into a little more Q&A time with us, but like, does it make sense when you're looking at a 30-day budget, like a monthly budget to go, all right, I only have this much money left. How much do I put in savings and how much do I put towards my debt? What would you guys say would be your, recommendation? Not saying this is what I would do, but how would you recommend that member decide what works best for them? Who wants to take that one?
I always err on the side of savings, but also with a debt plan. So until you have that emergency fund, I always recommend that people have something in place. You could start small with $500. So I know the $1,000 looks intimidating, but you can get there eventually. But have something in place, because like I mentioned earlier, you don't want to derail your debt plan and have that psychological break where, I had to stop this because I had to deal with this other thing. it just makes it harder to get motivated to start back again. So instead of that, if you have an emergency, just take care of that real quick, continue what you've been doing, and then continue on your debt plan. So I always start with the debt, but I always say, I start with savings and then move into debt.
So you're saying you help people decide how much do we want in that emergency fund, and then we will work towards saving. And then when we get there, we start our debt repayment plan, which I think is what most financial counselors would do. Right. Does yours differ?
And that's what I do too. Like if I have to borrow from if I have an emergency come up and I take from my savings, my first focus is on getting that emergency fund replenished, and then I can worry about the other stuff.
That's right.
The only thing that you have to watch out for when you're talking with other people and you're dealing with other people, because we know, I've had people that will always put money in the savings because they need that savings cushions, but they may be paying a credit card late. And so there's a whole nother issue there is don't not pay something or pay something late because you want to have that money in savings, because it's negating each other. If you're paying late, you're paying a $35 late fee. So if you put
affecting your credit score,
affecting your credit score. So if you're adamant about putting that money in one place when it really should be in another place, that's why it's all really individual. But you don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul. You want to make sure that you're taking care of everything that you need to take care of.
That's a great point. I do tell people let's pay minimums for now.
Yes.
Right. And because people have different ideas of what they're trying to do. So maybe they're paying extra on something over here. And then you tell them to start saving, and all of a sudden they switch their mindset to savings, like you just said. Yeah. So I usually tell people, let's pay minimums, get this savings up, and then we're playing with the leftovers. Right. Exactly.
And our budget tracking sheet that we use internally, that is how it's designed. It's once all the minimum payments are paid, do we have money left over? If we don't have money left over, we have a spending problem. We have to go back and look at that spending plan and say, how do I make this number positive where I have extra money to put into savings or pay my debt down, whichever one.
Right. And a lot of people feel like it has to be hundreds of dollars. It doesn't have to start out that way.
And I think too, the point about that though, is like, if you're like us, you want what you want now. You make your mind up and you're like, I want it. And this is the hard part of this. So hard. Is that, and this is where I say then the realities of the situation, you've got to recognize the reality of it. Because if you're telling me that I need to not start my debt plan until I've got X number of dollars saved up in my savings plan, it's easy to do the math, guys, and figure out how many months that will be. Like if you're, you can use a calculator to say, if I have X number of dollars per month to put into savings, it's going to take me this many months to save it to this amount. So I know that my debt payment, my debt repayment plan might not start until September.
Right.
Like, and that's where I think people go, oh, well, September, that's just too long.
Right.
Okay. So then my second advice to the member would be, and then what behaviors are we changing between now and September? Exactly. Because it, again, completely negates all the work you're doing if you're still putting stuff on the credit card.
Right.
Exactly.
So like we have a problem here. So this is where like that honesty and that reflection of like being real with ourselves, because I think some people go, oh, like, yay, I saved $2,000. Yeah, but your debt also went up by $1,500.
Exactly. Yeah. We're still
what's going on? Why is that happening? And your rates went up 6% last year. You know, like, so there's a lot of stuff that you kind of have to look at and be honest with.
Let me pause real quick. We have a question from the chat. Okay. F Doctor asked, when it comes to savings and an emergency fund is it best to put it in a high yield account, out of sight, out of mind?
Oh, good question. Who wants to take that?
So I'll take it. And this is just from personal. This is not studies that I've looked at. It's great to have a high yield fund if you can access it and not get a penalty if you need to access it, because the whole point of emergency fund, you don't want to be able to get to it too quick, but you also don't want to pay a penalty if you do have to access it.
I think it depends on what the penalty is.
I was
because for me, it's like, I don't mind paying a high penalty if my interest was higher than what I'd pay out.
Right.
Like,
if the penalty is just a dividend, the
right.
penalty is just a dividend you would have earned, which is how a lot of them work.
But some of them are 3 months worth of dividends that you earn.
That's a little different.
And so, you really have to consider what penalty or what are you going to pay to take that money out of there. I personally we have our CDs, which we never touch. And then we have a regular savings and then our emergency savings. There's got to be a reason for us to touch that emergency savings, and it doesn't cost us anything, but a mental thing for us is, okay, if we take from there because it's an emergency, then we have to put
You
it
have to
back in.
replenish it.
Right.
And see, we put our emergency fund in a CD, and our philosophy is if it's a true emergency, then we're willing to take that hit,
Okay.
because we're not actually losing money, even if it's the dividends.
Sure.
Mhm.
So
Sure. No, those are good. And
Yep.
see, again, an example of neither way is right or wrong.
exactly.
It's
Yeah.
just what works
My
for them.
way is right.
But it's just what works for their family. What is
Right.
right for you? What
Right.
is right for your family and your ideals about money? But to also be open to other ways of doing things, because you might go, well, this is just always the way that we did something, that we've done this. But
Exactly.
like sometimes when you pause and you do crunch the numbers, which we'll talk about tools that you use to help you crunch the numbers. Sometimes that's kind of an aha moment for some people, like the way you do a debt repayment plan, which we'll talk about again too.
Because to that point, we're both spenders. We've kind of found out. So having that money,
I've seen their shoe collection.
Yes.
having that money just sitting there available in a regular savings account for us, it doesn't work because it's too easy for us to dip into it. And so we're like, okay, how
You need to
can
make it
we-
harder
Exactly.
to access.
And you know
Yeah.
what? When I was your age, because I'm just a couple years older than him, I was the same way. I think as your life changes, your spending habits change, your saving habits change. And so now I wouldn't even think we've got multiple savings accounts and they're all for different things.
Yeah.
We would never think about dipping into this one or
Sure.
dipping into this one, even if it was an emergency, because that's not what that money's
Right.
for.
Good for
So
you.
it's whatever works for you.
We'll have that strength one day.
I
One
love
day.
I love
when
when
you're old and
members
decrepit like me.
stop it. I love when members ask, can you put this money in my account and freeze it where I can't touch it?
I know.
And it's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
legally, no, I can't
No.
do that.
Yeah.
Not unless it's a secured pledge loan
Yeah.
that you've pledged with your own income or your own money. But yeah, no, I can't do that. And so my advice is, and then I've had some people who come to me and go, I forgot 10 years ago, I put money in a savings account and I have $25 coming out of my check every month and I forgot about it.
Right.
Like, oh
How
my
did you
gosh.
forget?
Well, because it was out
Yes,
of sight, out of mind, and they don't
Yeah.
read their paycheck stubs.
Right.
So, and it was at a bank they don't frequent. Like it was not their primary financial institution, So I was like,
Which sometimes I feel
And they-
that is harder when they can see it all the time.
yeah.
To be like, oh, I can just transfer that
Exactly.
over.
It's the same with us.
Yeah,
We,
exactly.
Ours is in a whole nother
It's just kind of like out of sight, out of
way
mind.
out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. So I'm going to forego a few more of these questions just for the sake of time so we can wrap it up. So how then, what is our kind of our takeaway? What are our action plans? What do we need to do then in order to help figure out when do I save and when do I, or when and how do I save while I'm still paying my debt? So obviously you need to have a strategy, right? And here's just some examples that we've kind of talked about today. One is prioritize that high interest debt.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about debt repayment plans. We've talked about the snowball and we've talked about avalanche.
Mm-hmm.
I am currently in the mindset of avalanche wins, but that I am usually on the outskirts of the popularity vote there because it takes longer to get those wins.
Yep.
However, I have seen how specifically the two members that I'm working with, it is working because their interest rates have gone up so high on their debt that doing an avalanche method, it doesn't matter. In their case, they're still paying off multiple ones with their extra payment. So they're still seeing faster wins. And they're saving more money in the long run. So when I look at their overall debt over their, 2 or 3 year plan, their debt repayment plan, they're going to save hundreds of dollars.
Sure.
And I'm all in favor
Right.
of saving that. Now, if the math ended up being like, I don't know, less than $100, I'd be like, you just do what floats your boat, and usually I'm going to choose snowball for that. But I think it's important to ask, what motivates you? Do you want to get those wins faster? You want to see those debts pay off faster? If so, snowball is definitely the way to go. So do a little bit of research on both of those. And actually on our MoneyWi free MoneyWi program that we have for that you can access at envisioncu.com, there is a debt repayment module that talks about the difference between snowball and avalanche. So I would encourage you to go check that out. So prioritizing your high interest debt, coming up with which method works for you. And then obviously you'll save money in the long run, but do the math to figure it out. Which one motivates you the most? The second one would be starting that emergency fund. We recommend starting an initial fund. I I think the general rule of thumb is like 1,000. I think that number depends on you. It depends on your expenses. It depends on your lifestyle. It depends on so many things.
Size of your family.
1,000 might not be enough for some, like some of you may go, yeah, 1,000. Yeah, no. Like my dad had to replace a tire recently on his truck. And I almost like choked on my water. Like when he said how much he spent on one tire.
Yeah.
And I'm like, whoa, like, so an emergency fund would not have covered 4 tires or 2 tires. What if he had to replace 2 of them or whatever?
Yeah.
So we recommend starting that small initial fund and then think about the psychological benefits that you might have by creating that safety net. This is where we get a little kumbaya-ish on you, right? It's like, but seriously, like what are the feels?
It's amazing.
Seriously.
What are the feels
Yeah,
that I have? Am I sleeping a little better knowing that there's a cushion? For some people, I talk to some people and I'm like, actually, there's more anxiety because I know that could have gone towards my death. So it's like, oh my gosh, we can't live like that. We've got to pick one and we've got to go with it and be okay with it. But until they have an emergency. When they have an emergency, they'll be like, I'm really glad we did this. Right. So again, I think it just depends on what you're experiencing in life, because it is easy for us to just assume that we are you're never the exception to the rule.
Right.
We always assume, oh, that's not going to happen to me. Okay, well, let's flip that and assume that it is. And I think when you start expecting it to happen to you, even though it might not happen frequently, it might only happen 2 or 3 times in your lifetime, but you are not the exception to emergency rules, and you never know what's going to happen. So expect it.
We had the past hurricane, our generator went out as the hurricane was like on its way. And so we had to go buy a new generator because our neighborhood is guaranteed to lose power.
I was going to say,
it's just,
yeah,
it just
y'all
is
do.
what it is.
It's bad.
And so we had an emergency fund and we were able to go out and get a generator. We were lucky enough to find one.
I know. I think when he told me that story, I was like, and you found one?
We did.
Yeah.
At an auto parts store. So it might be a pro tip.
There you go. Nice. Okay. And then the third strategy tip would be balancing those contributions. So try to figure out how much you want to allocate as a percentage of your income to savings and debt repayment. Typically, the rule of thumb is 80-20. And this backs into a previous conversation we had about the 50-30-20 rule when it comes to your spending plan. So 20% of your income should go towards debt repayment and savings. All right. For most people, they don't even have 20% after they've done their 50 or their necessities and then their needs and their wants. And so once you determine your debt repayment, that your minimum payments, and then you have that number, this is what I have extra. That's then when you go, all right, do I split this 80-20 and put some of it into savings and the rest of it towards debt repayment? Or do I put all of it into savings? Like Andre gave an example of, do I put it all into savings and then start the debt repayment once my minimum savings amount is this much? And then how much do I continue to go? Because the other thing is, I wouldn't say just stop at the 1,000.
Oh, no.
You know what I mean? No. And so I love doing that 80-20 split.
I'm glad that you said that just now, because the 1,000 is the initial goal, right? But the ultimate goal, most experts say, is 3 to 6 months of living expenses.
For the big emergencies.
For the big, like losing your job, like health and like crazy things that happen. So don't stop at 1,000 if you don't have to. Keep going. Yeah.
And then the second part of that balancing is highlighting automation tools that could help you with saving and repayment. Now, automation tools for me when I was a young married person, it was actually bad for me because I did not my head wasn't wrapped around it. But I did actually hear in some of the people who answered some of my social questions about what would you tell your younger self. I did have one person in particular who felt strongly about the power of automation versus so much in the weeds on budgeting. And I'm like, that's good advice for the right personality.
Right.
It doesn't work for everybody. But like for me, yes, I wish I would have focused more on not just automation, but recognizing the reality of the automation is tied to this, and I'm making sure there's enough money in this account to pay that automated bill, whatever. But automation can certainly work in your favor as long as you've got it together.
Right.
Because if you're not paying attention, and you're not moving money to where it needs to go, it can really mess you up like it did for me that
Yes.
time that my power got shut off because my building get paid.
Oh, you
Right?
too?
Right? So, okay. And then the last one here will be planning for the future. Discuss investing in retirement planning for long-term goals once debt is manageable, and then use the tools that you have available to help calculate what's projected that you may need. And again, I'm kind of thinking more in investments and retirement plans, things like that. There's really cool calculators out there that can help you determine how much should I be, and then how much can I? And then the other side to that is the caveat is that we try to remind y'all of every time is don't leave free money on the table. So
Right.
if you have a match program for a 401k through your employer, you want to take advantage of
Take
that.
advantage.
So
Absolutely.
consider that. I know some people, gosh, even me myself, sometimes I've considered, should I pull back on how much I'm contributing to that because the cost of goods and life is happening or the stage of life that we're in to free up more income? And my financial advisor always says, no, not unless it's above what they're matching, right? Which there have been seasons where I'm doing more than the match amount and I've pulled that back a little and then contributed it because we get to change it. You get to change it at the beginning of every quarter. You get to decide. But if there's a match, just
Take it.
again, out of sight, out of mind, take it, pretend it's not there.
Literally
Because
free
it's coming
money.
out of your check and you don't even see it.
Right.
Right. Out of,
Yeah.
Now, I would say if you have some extenuating circumstances that are like a matter of a major life change, this might be a different conversation,
Sure.
right? I mean, if there's a very unique extenuating circumstance, then I might go, hey, let's not, let's pause. The problem is statistics show, and even my financial counselor or advisor will tell you, the problem is while that sounds great and it works for you now, most people don't go back and change
Right.
it.
Exactly.
And then they
Right.
find themselves 15 years later going, I never increased. I never went back and increased my contribution again. I just kept it at whatever it was.
Because it's way in the back of your mind anyways.
Because you get used to that new payment. You're like, all right, that's my new, or you get that new car that costs a lot more than you had last time you had an auto loan, right? And you just get used to those new pay. So his advice is, and I think we would agree that like, if you're not drowning or dying right now and it's working okay, keep that where it is.
Right.
And let's focus more on the other stuff that we can control a little bit more of, like what are we spending our money on, that sort of thing. Okay. And then, so our closing and key takeaways before you guys answer the question I asked y'all at the beginning. Real quick, just remember, if you are doing this balancing act of debt versus savings, right? Just a couple of key takeaways to remember is really kind of getting in touch with your psychological state. How am I feeling about this topic, right? What do I think about savings? What do I think about the debt repayment plan? What is a comfortable number for me? Do I have enough money to cover $1,000 emergency right now? Yes or no? And I think all of those things are kind of your guiding light to knowing, what is my balancing act going to look like in 2025? How do I start making some decisions about that? And so that would be our challenge to you, is to kind of reflect on some of that.
For sure.
And then also, I did want to mention, we do have a module on MoneyWi that is specifically called Building an Emergency Savings. And so if you want to check that out, just go to envisioncu.com and look for MoneyWi under our education tab, and you'll be able to access that playlist along with other modules within that playlist that talk about debt repayment, how to create a budget, that sort of stuff. So I definitely check that out, and it's free. It's absolutely free. And then look at other tools like calculators, budgeting templates, spending plans. It's kind of a nicer way to say that. Spending plans, to find tools that you can use to crunch the numbers. The numbers don't lie. The numbers speak for themselves, and they really can help you make decisions, because sometimes that's all I'm doing with my members when we're sitting down and talking about plans. Like if they'll go, well, what would you do? And I don't like the what would you do questions. It's more like, okay, let's go back and flip that back on.
Sure.
What motivates you then? Like if I were to give you $1,000 right now, what would you spend it on? Right. And so I want to kind of end with this question, and then the other one that I asked you earlier. But if
That's two questions.
I know. But if you, hang on, I gotta find it. If you did have if I give you guys $1,000 right now, how would
Wait,
you?
are you?
No, sorry.
Well, dang it.
But if I were, what would you do? Would you pay down debt, or would you put it in saving, or would you split it, and why?
Savings.
You put it all in savings.
Mhm.
I love this question because it's tax season right now, as we're recording. And so I get this question a lot. And my answer is kind of controversial.
Oh,
So-
I'm glad I asked it then. I
Mhm.
love controversy.
I say, if let's say
Go buy shoes.
Yeah.
Well,
Sorry.
I mean, so if you have a debt plan right now, I would say 90% towards the debt, 10% on yourself.
Okay. So you put 90% towards your debt. And
Mhm.
so you kind of not even do the 80-20, you go 90-20 or 90-10.
90-10. Yep.
Okay.
I
And
feel-
why?
Well, because I feel like it's a windfall. It's unexpected money,
Unexpected, okay.
right? And so as in our lives, we already have savings kind of in place. And so we always feel like we need to, reward is kind of a weird word, but like enjoy ourselves
Mhm.
every once in a while. And so we would use the remaining money to enjoy ourselves
Okay.
and do something
Okay.
nice.
I like
But
it.
that's going to keep you on track, though.
We would stay
So-
on track as long as
right.
we're on track. Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. So then,
How about you?
oh, me?
Yeah.
Mine would probably go in savings.
Okay.
One thing that Tim and I changed last year with all the high rates. So I have a little confession to make. We used to be of the mindset where when we had a trip coming up, we would put it on the card so we could get our points and all that, and then we would pay it off faster. Well, with rates being so high, we wouldn't be able to pay them off as fast as we would want to. So we switched things last year
Mhm.
and started intentionally saving more. And now we're paying cash for the trips, which feels
Isn't that
amazing.
amazing?
No,
We did that
So
too.
we have
And
three
started doing that
trips.
too.
We
Yeah.
have three
Yeah.
trips coming up this year. And like our travel savings account, because we also have multiple savings
Mhm.
accounts. We have an emergency fund, and then we have our kind of our secondary savings.
Mhm.
Like, what do we like for whatever? That has become our upcoming trips one.
Sure.
So it's like, I know if the Airbnb transaction's taking place on this month, then every month we're putting money aside.
Yep.
So I would add that probably to our travel savings
And you know,
fund.
that is the
Because
greatest
it's been
thing
feeling
ever.
good.
Because when you go on a trip, the worst thing that you want to do is pay for it after it's over.
Right.
Like it's like you're planning it, you're paying for it, you're ready to go, and you're excited about it. And when you get back, it's paid off. And
Yeah.
you don't have to, you can start planning for the next
And
one.
that's what
The only bad thing I hate about it though is that I'm not getting points on it like I was. So there's
Yeah.
that. It's like, so I'm trying to come up with a clever way, like save it, put it on the card to get the points, and then still turn it.
Right.
So I'm hopefully going to
See-
do it. So that's what we're working
And
towards
we
this year.
we put all of our stuff on a card and then pay
I
it
love
off.
the point. The
so
points
that
are
we
so
get the
great.
points.
Yeah, the
so that
points
we
have
can
been
travel
so
with the
good.
points.
See, we're late to the party. We decided last year we put all of our trips on the cards, like I was saying. But this year we decided we're going to pay cash for our trips.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it feels really good. So that's what I would
Yep.
do. All right. So last question, because I think we're almost over time. We have a few minutes. What would you tell your younger self then? And it doesn't necessarily have to be related to this, but if you could go back and ask or tell yourself some advice, your younger self at any stage of life,
Mhm.
what advice would you give yourself?
Mine would be to pay my bills on time.
Oh, were you bad
Because
about
I didn't, my parents didn't have credit. They said, don't ever get credit.
Ah.
And so my first card, it was a Cato's. Sorry, Cato's. I'm gonna throw that thing. I got a $300 credit card and I paid on it a couple times. Then I really couldn't afford it. And that's back when you didn't even get a card. Okay. I'm not like ready to die, but it was before they gave you a store card. You just had store credit.
Yeah.
And I moved and I couldn't afford to make the payments and I just didn't. And I did not realize at the time how that was going to affect me. And I still didn't realize it 3 years later when I went to buy a car. I had saved up $1,600, which doesn't sound like a lot, but minimum wage was $3.25.
Wow.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
it took me a while of walking and stuff to save that money up. And I went to a dealership to buy a car and they just said, you're not qualified. They didn't
Mhm.
tell me anything. I felt they made me feel really small. They didn't take the time to explain to me why. They just said, you're not qualified, and off I went. I didn't find out till years later. And then I had to fix that problem.
Right.
Because of late
So,
fees, yeah.
because I just didn't know.
Yeah.
And I didn't know. We didn't talk about that at school. We didn't talk about it at home. So I just didn't have the knowledge.
Yeah, it's
Sure.
good.
Yeah.
How about you?
Mine changed just now as you were talking. Mine would be pay attention. So pay attention to what you're spending your money on and what's important to you. Because I feel like I spent a lot of money frivolously just on things that didn't matter. So I would just say pay attention. Like, pay attention to how much groceries cost. Pay attention to how much you're putting gas in your car and where you're going
Yeah.
and that type of stuff. So.
Yeah, that's good.
I would like to share that I have a member that I'm working with right now, and she paid attention.
Mhm.
She came in with a book full of receipts. I said, save your receipts and look to see what you're spending the money on, because she was like, I have no idea. Bless her heart, she came in with an envelope full of receipts, and she was like, I had no idea.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I've
Yeah.
never had anybody do this. Like,
Yeah.
I was so proud of her.
Physically
But
bring in
but-
every receipt.
Sure.
it
It opens your
meant
eyes.
so much to her to see what she was spending her money on. She's like, I'm going to change this. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes that tangible reality
Mhm.
again.
It
is
scared
very
me.
motivating. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
But, yeah.
even as financial counselors, like it is so refreshing to be in this field because
Yes.
it challenges me personally.
Yeah.
Because, if you're going to sit here and talk about it, you want to feel very confident that you also are practicing what you
Right.
preach,
Exactly.
And so
Right.
a lot of times it really, like, I've had some great conversations with my husband and go, like I know that we kind of believe this, but like we don't do this really
Mhm.
well. Like, let's
Right.
talk about that. And after 20 years of marriage, you just kind of, like, with your money, you just kind of get into these grooves
Yeah,
and
yeah.
on autopilot about things.
Mhm.
But it's like, are you really making decisions that are the best for your family?
Right.
Like, you could be benefiting in another way.
Yep.
So no, those are really good. So, well, this was a great topic. We don't have time to talk about this, but since it's the beginning of the year, one of the things that Andre is going to do when he uploads our podcast, if you're listening to the podcast, is we're going to add a list of some book recommendations, because there's a lot of really great book ideas. There's some that are really stupid too.
Yes, there
So
are.
read reviews and kind of whatever, but like, everybody's got something to say about money, and it's like,
Mhm.
Lord knows, I don't plan on writing another book. There's enough of them out there, but there's some really good ones out there that we've kind of made a short list of. And so we'll pop that up on the show notes for the podcast so that you can access some books, and some books that we kind of like, or that we've recommended to people, or that people have recommended to us. I'm building my book list for 2025. I have more on my list now than I think I have time in 2025 to even read, but at least I've got a great selection there. And some of them are personal money management books. So we hope that you'll take a look at that. You can find our podcast wherever you listen to your podcast favorites, like your murder shows like me. But our podcast is The Hoot, and you can just search for Envision Credit Union or The Hoot wherever you listen to your podcast, and you can listen to the podcast episodes of these, which is basically just the excerpts of our live webinar today.
Yep.
All right. Well, we are going to be doing a special bonus episode as well coming up in the next couple of weeks to also shine a light on some fraud things that are
Yes.
going on in the world. And so be paying attention for some information coming up on that. Not
It's
sure if
one
we're
of my
going to.
favorite topics. I'm excited.
Oh, I hate it. It gives me so much heartburn just to hear the stories that
Yes.
Yeah.
things that happen to people. I just
Yep.
absolutely hate it. And it makes me angry because there's people out there being fraudsters when they need to just have a normal, legit job like the rest of us.
And makes her want
good
to
people.
murder someone.
No. Okay. On that note, we're done. All right. Thank you guys all
Thank
for being
you.
here.
Thank you
We'll
so
see you
much.
guys on the next MoneyWise Wednesday. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.